The Brady Bunch, the Brady Bunch.
Meet George Jetson.
But what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by this society when a black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu, I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than it already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You had to be able then to turn up all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know that white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians, and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their union. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
Conservative media and many Americans are sure that we're in the middle of a war on police, that it's never been harder or more dangerous to be a cop in America.
The war on cops is real. I've been talking about it for years now. We know it was the worst in 2016.
What's fueling this war on cops?
This is a war on cops.
War on cops. War on police.
The war on police.
This anti-police rhetoric that has gone on in the United States for the last several years.
There is so much anti-police sentiment circulating in the country today, and it has been for the last few years.
I think it's trendy to hate cops right now. I honestly do. I think it's trendy to hate cops. I think it's trendy to bash cops.
You have the escalation of this problem by groups like Black Lives Matter, who coincidentally fit the perfect definition of terrorists.
You've got a certain segment of society that are very defiant. They hate law enforcement, and this Black Lives Matter movement has perpetuated the violence we've seen here lately.
They are putting out the Black Lives Matter narrative, which is that we're living through an epidemic of racially biased police killings of blacks.
There's no question that the Black Lives Matter and other far-left radical groups are attacking the credibility of U.S. law enforcement in general.
But the numbers don't actually bear that out.
2015 is on pace to be one of the lowest totals of officers gunned down in the line of duty in the last 25 years.
According to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, in 2017, 128 police officers died in the line of duty. Of that 128, 44 were shot, 47 died in traffic-related instances, and the other 37 died due to illness, drowning, and other causes.
Another study found evidence of a significant bias in the killing of unarmed Black Americans relative to unarmed white Americans.
223 blacks were gunned down by police in that same year.
The probability of being Black unarmed and shot by police is about 3.49 times the probability of being white unarmed and shot by police.
Hell, more black folks have been shot and killed by police already this year than that 44 police officer number who were shot all of last year.
When factoring in threat level, Black Americans who are fatally shot by police are, in fact, less likely to be posing an imminent lethal threat to the officers at the moment they are killed than white Americans fatally shot by police.
And so why would that be? Why would it be that if you are a Black unarmed male, you are significantly more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white unarmed male? And we already know the answer to that. It's not because every Black male is a master of jujitsu and can kill with his bare hands. It has to do with perception. It has to do with fear. It has to do with the idea that the police have that when they see an unarmed Black male, he is still a deadly threat to their lives.
The police did not come down to earth on a ray of light. You know, the sky didn't open up and then the police rode that ray of light down to earth. It's a frustrating situation, but I think what we can get lost in that is the truth about the role of modern policing.
Right.
The origins and role of modern policing. That got to be addressed.
What people fail to realize is that slavery was more than just whips and chains. It was an economic institution that functioned as the backbone of the Southern economy. To understand the role of modern policing and its implications today is to understand that their history as an entity is inextricably woven with the legacy of slavery. The first police forces were derived from the slave patrols of the early 18th and late 19th century, which were groups of white men given the job of maintaining slave society by catching runaway enslaved people and to suppress any rebellions by whatever means they deemed necessary. The collapse of slavery essentially shattered the Southern economy, so once we moved into the Reconstruction period after the Civil War, former slave owners and others immediately took advantage of the 13th Amendment loophole, which stated that slavery was prohibited unless you were being punished for a crime. Many freed slaves were arrested in droves for baseless crimes like vagrancy, loitering, and public disturbance, then forced to do labor in order to rebuild the Southern economy. This new system, known as convict leasing, was what many refer to as the new slavery. Moving into the 1870s, a greater emphasis is placed on states' rights as opposed to federal oversight, and a new era of Jim Crow is born. The Jim Crow era, which was responsible for the separate but equal laws that many are already familiar with, was a time when unspeakable acts of terrorism were committed against Black people by hate groups like the KKK and larger segments of the Southern population. At this time, the slave patrols began to morph into the more structured, professionalized forces we see today as society began to industrialize in the cities. The Equal Justice Initiative estimated that over 4,000 lynchings occurred during the period between Reconstruction and World War II. If Black people did not abide by both the overt rules of the law and the covert mandates of society, they could expect to be shamed, brutalized, or lynched. When such events occurred, the police either turned a blind eye or they instigated the violence themselves. In the case of a young Black man named Jesse Thornton, a cop organized his lynching after Thornton addressed him by his real name instead of sir. Southerners would participate in lynch mobs so often and so casually that they'd send postcards to family and friends with illustrations of the ordeal. This blatant social terror, on top of the economic and political stresses of the time, prompted many blacks to flee to northern industrial cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Boston, and New York, which still have very large black populations as a result today. After the civil rights movement of the 1960s picked up steam, the role of police is defined once again as a direct opposition to the black resistance to oppression. During protests, they let dogs loose on people, spray them with fire hoses, arrest protesters by the clusters, and even let black communities be bombed and burned. After the civil rights movement was quelled, Nixon declared a figurative war on drugs in the 70s, which then prompted Reagan to launch a literal war on drugs in the 80s to deal with the crack epidemic. Out of Reagan's administration came mandatory minimum sentences, which required anyone caught with 5 grams of crack to serve at least 5 years in prison. This was heavily criticized as having racial undertones because it took 500 grams of powder cocaine, a largely white suburban drug, to carry the same sentence as crack, the largely black urban drug. This ultimately led to ridiculous increases in the incarcerated population. By Clinton's administration in the 90s, a new hysteria broke out about the rising violent crime rates among the youth population, and a new tagline emerged: the super predator.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing.
By the year 2005, we may very well have a bloodbath of teenage violence.
Feeling obligated to seem tough on crime, Clinton launched his infamous 1994 crime bill that is quite literally responsible for the massive expansion of the prison population that we cannot contain today.
Violent crime and the fear it provokes are crippling our society. The crime bill before Congress gives you a chance to do something about it. A chance to be tough and smart.
What President Clinton did in 1994 is actually far more harmful than his predecessors, because he actually built that infrastructure that we see today, the militarization, all the way down to small rural police departments that have SWAT teams.
That omnibus crime bill was responsible for a massive expansion of the prison system. And beyond that, it provided all kinds of money and perverse incentives for law enforcement to do a lot of the things that we nowadays consider to be abusive.
Since these policies have been enacted, many black and brown individuals in structurally disadvantaged communities have expressed that their encounters with the police have left them feeling violated, humiliated, harassed, and criminalized. At no point in this country's history have black and brown people had a reason to trust the police to legitimately protect and serve them, neither at their inception nor in the present tense. We must understand that the police have always operated as a mechanism under the state to maintain white supremacy. So people have a right to be angry. People have a right to feel like there is injustice, and we all have a right to hold them accountable.
One day we sitting around drinking and gambling,
this when I was younger, so I had to be like college, right after college, and the gang task force come through. The gang task force got a license to do whatever they want. So it's always up against the wall. Any black dude that ever comes from a real hood know the up against the wall routine. They start patting you down, violate you, you feel dirty, you feel helpless, they talk crazy to you, do whatever they want to, they steal. They have been stealing my boy Dre's money for like 3 days straight. And Dre said, hey, y'all can take the money, but give me a receipt. And they was like, what? It's like 6 of us against the wall. You can take the money, but give me a receipt. And the cop got quiet. Everybody got quiet, like, what? We feeling dirty, violated. The cop gave Dre the money back. Now, we just went from feeling like zeros to like, what?
When I was younger, we had stop and frisk before there was even any kind of stop and frisk. We used to just be hanging out, and the cops would show up. We had one cop we nicknamed Nazi, because he was white, stocky guy, tattoos, bald head, and he treated us like straight prisoners. We weren't doing anything. You know, he would hop out of the car, weapons drawn sometimes, you know, billy club in hand, and have us all lay down. He's acting like he's checking for drugs and guns, knowing damn well we ain't have none of that. But he loved to do it because it was like a power trip for him, and I hated that shit, yo. I hated it so much. It made me hate the cops, real talk. But I understood why he was doing it because it was power for him, and he felt as though he was powerful in that moment, in that time.
I remember when I attended a protest for Trayvon Martin in Union Square, and as I was heading home back to Long Island, I took the Long Island Railroad, and I had a hoodie on. The conductor asked me to remove my hoodie. So I ignored him. Next thing you know, there were police officers waiting for me at Hicksville, the next stop. They escorted me off the train. They pinned me down to the pavement. I remember them sitting on top of me. I couldn't even breathe. They sat me up in a squat position. The white passengers were laughing. They really got a kick out of it. One of the officers started writing out the tickets, a total of 3. He would ball them up and throw them at me. I went home and I cried my heart out. It was so degrading. I felt so violated. And that's when I realized who I was and where I was. And that was being black in America.
Won't be long. Oh, freedom won't be long.
You cannot lynch me and keep me in ghettos without becoming something monstrous yourselves. And furthermore, you give me a terrifying advantage. You never had to look at me. I had to look at you. I know more about you than you know about me.
Saving us, it's the same. Man, I like I made it up. You blaming us. You keep it 100, you gave it dangerous. Nigga, we still in chains. 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 You put the shame on us. We still in chains. 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 You put the shame on us.